welcome to Futuretelling. I'm Fred Barnhart, and I have the privilege of being Dean of the University Libraries here at NIU. I'm so excited to bring you tonight's conversation in honor of the remarkable Grace Hopper's birthday. Our program is called Does the Future Compute? And not only do we have some amazing scientists and researchers with us, but we also have outstanding authors to help us imagine the possibilities of the future. We would like to thank the Friends of the NIU Libraries and NIU STEAM for their support. We'd also like to thank NIU's Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development, and the Division of Research and Innovation Partnerships for their commitment to community programming like this. These future-telling conversations are at their core about hope. Hope that rational thinking will win out over fear, hope that science will continue to help us make sense of the world, and hope that by working creatively and cooperatively, we can bring about a brighter future. These goals have never been more important than today, I think. We believe that science fiction and science research go hand in hand and help us to imagine the future. If you're interested in supporting Futuretelling, go to go.niu.edu/give Futuretelling and make a donation of any size. We appreciate your support. And with that, I am pleased to hand it off to my friend, Gillian King-Cargile, Director of NIU's STEM Read, who will moderate tonight's talk and then invite you to participate in the Q&A session. The event will be recorded and posted on the Futuretelling website. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome, Gillian and guests. Let's see if we can do this. Cheers, Gillian.
Cheers, Fred.
Hey, okay.
Clink.
Great,
Thank
clink.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're really excited about tonight. This is going to be a little different than some of our other Futuretelling events because we have, as you can see probably on your screen, a lot of guests. So what we wanted to do was give you a lot of information about different aspects of computer science and have two authors who have explored computer science and social networking in their work kind of talk about what's happening in research now with the scientists and then forecast what might happen in the future and also how these things might affect science fiction. So what we're going to do is I'll have the authors come on and introduce themselves, and then we'll talk to one STEM expert at a time. And then at the end of the night, you will get to ask questions during our Q&A. So right now, I would like to welcome Joelle Charbonneau and Aaron Starmer. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here tonight. As you know, I'm a big fan of both of your books, and I appreciate all the work that both of you have done with the STEM Read program over the years. So thanks so much for coming.
Of course, thanks for having us.
Thank you. I am excited. I can't wait to talk to scientists.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you're excited about it. It would be awkward if you were not.
I always like talking to people that are smarter than me.
So Joelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and some of the ways that it intersects with computer science?
Sure thing. I write young adult, but more often than not for young adults, I am writing things that are thriller, near future, sometimes even fantasies, contemporary. But I do put a lot of computer science, strangely enough, into it. I don't always consider myself the most computer literate person, but it's amazing how technology is so much a part of our lives that you can't escape it. So I have written a standalone thriller that is about social media and what could be behind some of the platforms and and where is the line that we draw in the sand, for ourselves when we are on social media, and what could be behind people who are rewarding us for not so necessarily great choices that we make. And my most recent series, Verify and Disclose, is about kind of words being taken out of our language by the government, with our technology always pushing the envelope about going green and avoiding, having paper books and more electronic books. At what point could we lose pieces of our history just with a click of a button? And when people stop learning how to verify facts and only believe the wonderful Facebook posts sometimes they see, and believe those things are real, at what point do words start to distort our reality in a way that we suddenly can't recognize it from what it was only a few years ago, which sometimes feels very familiar right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I hate it when our dystopians become our reality. That's been
Yeah, it's a little, it's a near future, but it was supposed to be alternate history. It's not supposed to be real history.
right. Yeah, and I love in Need how people are anonymous in this social network site, and so they push the envelope more and more in terms of acceptable behavior, and that tends to leak out into real life. So I think that was an interesting way that you wrote that. And Aaron Starmer, speaking about ways that people act in real life as opposed to online, your newest book is Meme.
Yep, I brought visual aids.
Excellent.
So very dark, so you can't see it too much, but obviously the meme pops, and that's the important part. This is a murder mystery, and came out this year. Well, actually, it's not really a murder mystery. It's you know who did the murder. It's whether they will get away with it. It's a group of high school students murder one of their friends that they think is dangerous, and then they bury his body with a confession, a video confession. And somehow that video confession gets out, and a screen cap from it becomes a meme. And it's sort of exploring the what memes mean in our society, not just with young people, but what they mean in terms of political change that's going on now, and what they mean in terms of the evolutions of ideas. I'm really interested in things that sort of spiral out of control and you don't know where they started. So it's the story of a group of teenagers that are trying to protect themselves from getting in trouble while no one else really knows what they did. They just know this meme that's out there, and sort of how that eats away at them. So I'm interested in, obviously, when you're writing about young people and you're writing contemporary things, you've got to be interested in social media and how it affects them. But this is actually slightly a period piece. I wrote it in 2015 and 2016, and then had to rewrite it because of the changes in the world. And I kept it set in 2016 because I sort of viewed that as an important moment for memes in the political and social discourse. You know, one thing I would like to talk to the scientists about is as a writer, when you write a book and it's going to be a year or two till it comes out, how do you keep up, especially with something that's ever changing like this? And that's why having the input of people that are on the front lines of this is always helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we should jump right in then. We're going to invite Marius Stan with us from Argonne National Laboratory. And Marius is a researcher and he is also a writer. But I will let him introduce his work and come onto camera. He is at the forefront of the researchers, as you say, who are pushing things forward all of the time, and also helping things change very quickly. It might not seem like it to researchers as they're making these changes, but to us outside of research, it just seems like things keep happening like that. So if Marius could turn on his camera and microphone and join us. Hello.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see you all. I long for seeing people and talking with people, even over the internet. The story I'm going to tell you, although it's a science story, it's about the evolution of computational science. It has some elements that link to science fiction and also to murder mysteries. So let me just jump in by sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. So let's try again. How about now?
Yes.
All right. So, okay. So as I said, science fiction, it's murder mysteries. It started during the World War II with a group of people in United Kingdom at the National Physics Laboratory. The leader of that group, Alan Turing, engaged everybody in creating a machine that could do additions, subtractions, and multiplications much faster than any human being. And they used that to decipher the encoding used by the Germans in their Enigma machine, which helped the victory in the Second World War II. But you know, that seemed like such a simple goal to have, to crunch numbers better than the humans can do. With time, the role of computers in science, in technology, in the society has changed tremendously. Even in the 50s and 1950s, we have witnessed the emergence of neural networks, algorithms that simulate the way the human brain functions, the synapses, the neurons, and also machine learning, algorithms that can learn from data. It happens, however, like in any story, there's a moment between 1976 and 1997, there was the artificial intelligence winter, a period of time where the results appear to be far from the expectations. Not much progress, everything was moving ahead slowly. Why is that? Some think the computers were not powerful enough. Others think there was no Google to Google stuff. I believe there was some excessive overstating of the power of artificial intelligence. Society expected robots to take over everything, to help us, even replace us in all respects. Now, thankfully, in 1997, a Deep Blue machine, a computer, was able to defeat Garry Kasparov, the world champion in chess. That brought artificial intelligence to the attention of everybody, right? So a machine can be smarter than a human. Is that possible? And it is. In 2011, another magical year, personal assistants appeared. Siri for iPhones, then Cortana. Nowadays we have Alexa and Hey Google and other stuff. And we do take advice now from computers. Quite different from crunching numbers and going through editing documents and making simulations. No computers give us advice. And we take that seriously. And let me just show you how in science, artificial intelligence is now a partner, is a member of our scientific team. So here's an example. We all have seen candle flames and can tell instantly if the flame is stable or unstable, and maybe stable again. How do we do that? We have experience, we've learned so many years of life, in my case, quite many, of witnessing, of seeing flames. Without explaining it very well, we can make that determination. Can the machines do the same? How about this complex flame in a synthesis process? It would be very difficult for me, at least, to say if it's stable or not and when. Is there a dangerous condition that occurred? We can have software that can analyze these images and video games and can monitor the stability of the flame and even communicate to the technologists, you know what, there is something wrong, you better come over here and take action. Or even, and here is the challenging and fascinating part, maybe we can entrust the software with taking action, with making a decision on our behalf. And this software is based on machine learning, on models like this example, where the code was able to group various images into stable, unstable, and uncertain. So our research team today is formed by humans, very smart individuals, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, computer scientists. These are our collaborators.
Dr. Stan?
Yes.
I think that your screen sharing might be taking up a lot of your bandwidth. We're having a little trouble with your sound cutting in and out.
How about now?
Seems okay right now.
Okay, so this is our wonderful team. We are doing well with, in terms of expertise. As I said, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and so on. Last summer, we were lucky to have a student, an undergrad student, as a member of the team. And she made such an impact that we invited her to co-author a journal article. Even more, she's the first author of that journal article. Pretty good for an undergrad, right? But here is the newest member of our team. If I hope I can bring it back.
You
Yeah.
might want to try, if you can do it without the screen sharing, that might help with your sound.
How about I stop sharing the screen completely? Can you hear me better?
So far, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Thank
was
you.
saying that our team is formed by humans. We were lucky to have a summer student last summer, an undergrad, and she became the first author of a research paper. And furthermore, we consider our Python code a reliable, trustworthy member of our research. And I hope that in a few years, we will acknowledge the contribution of this intelligent software to our research and maybe list it on a publication. So here are the authors, and we also have our Python code. And it could be that I live long enough to see intelligent software making a scientific discovery and be the first author of a journal article. I do that because I believe that machines do think. And we are surrounded by thinking machines.
So what I'm what I'm getting is that you're thinking that soon your intelligent thinking machines could be powerful enough and reliable enough that they could actually be co-authors on your research. Is that?
That is correct.
Okay. And I know from other talks with you that you've talked about that idea that right now artificial intelligence isn't as intelligent as we've, as we thought it would be, right?
That is also true. There are limitations to the level of intelligence that the software can exhibit compared to humans, for example. And although the ability of these codes to process data, large amounts of data, and at a high rate is extraordinary, it surpasses any human brain, their intuition and creativity is not that well developed. Not to mention that they don't have a good personality, they cannot create or tell a good joke. In spite of that, I claim that intelligent software is already a partner in the research teams, and that will continue, their role will continue to increase.
Okay. Do you think that the writers in the group need to worry about AI taking over the role of novelists? Are we going to be out of the job?
They should be. In 2016 in Japan, there was a contest for short stories. And a group of computer scientists had one of these codes write a short story. So the short story created by the machine made it, I believe, past 2 rounds of reviews and then was discarded as not being creative enough. But twice, the members of the review committee believed that it was maybe a less gifted author, and promoted the story to the next level. I think that is already impressive.
Yeah. Impressive or frightening. Aaron and Joelle, what questions do you have for Dr. Stan?
I don't know. I'm terrified now that I'm losing my job, but that was what I was getting through his talk, is I'm no longer going to be necessary at all.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm always thinking of when you see stories, sci-fi stories about AI, they either take one of 2 directions. It's either an AI gets to a point where it has emotions and it has an existential crisis, or it gets too smart but has no moral boundaries and takes over. Those are your sort of two sci-fi stories. But for someone that's working with it every day, there's got to be a lot more nuance and other avenues that I think could inspire writers. I mean, just what you're telling us right now about, this an AI contributing to your research. I was immediately thinking of like inner office jealousy with an AI, something like that. So do you have any thoughts on that?
It could be, especially since if what I suggested, that it's possible that an intelligent software makes a discovery. So imagine that a group research team is looking passionately to find a new chemical compound with extraordinary properties. And let's assume that the intelligent software is the one that gets to such a compound first. There could be some jealousy there, right? People might say, oh, I wish I was the one who made this discovery. But in a sense, the humans are the ones who create this software and train it. A good software, a good machine learning algorithm requires an education, much like a student, much like a person. And if it gets a good education, it's going to be quite helpful. It will make good predictions. If it gets a bad education, they will exhibit biases and will make predictions that are truly wrong. And that's not only in science, was observed in other applications of artificial intelligence across society.
I find that so fascinating, because I admit I was starting to think when you were talking about a partnership between AI and people, like what if we truly merged the two? If there was some way to put some sort of AI into a person to make them not able to be fooled by a meme or incorrect information, because there would be that analytical part. But perhaps if somebody is training that AI poorly, they would be subject to the same human biases and the ability to be fooled as any. I thought we had found almost a foolproof way to like make people like totally fact-based in the story.
I don't think that is possible. I also don't think it's desirable. Cyborgs are cool in the movies, but I would say that for a long while, we will continue to interact with these intelligent machines, intelligent entities, in a way that doesn't require us to, let's say, implant electronic devices in ourselves. But still, these interactions, both of you mentioned a variety of feelings, emotions that can be developed by the device or between humans and the device. I remember two movies, Her, if you've seen Her with Joaquin Phoenix, or Ex Machina, where the robot turns and destroys the humans who created. So it's possible that these interactions are as dramatic, even though my expectation is that we will not have chips implemented in our brain soon and it's not necessary truly to partner with these intelligent machines. You don't have to have them under your skin or somewhere in your cerebellum. The communication is good enough as is, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so when you're talking about how to train AI well, are there ethics in place? Like how do you keep people from, training it to do evil or to, delete facts or erase things?
As I said, education follows the same methodology, if you want, for software as it does for humans. And a good teacher could turn a poor student into a brilliant one, and I would say a crappy software into a high quality one. The same way it is. And here is a myth that I would like to dispel. For a machine learning algorithm to work well, it doesn't necessarily need a lot of data. It needs data that is representative of that system. If it's physics, you want data from across the parametric space. If you train an AI software to become an HR person, you want to train it giving the software information from a variety of applicants. If you only train it on people from Chicago, it's going to tell you that you should hire somebody from Chicago because that's what it learned, much like a human. So I would say that the training is very important, and it's more important that the data set to be representative of the problem at hand, far more important than having many data points possibly in the same small investigation domain.
Which means for fiction purposes, we could actually give it poor data sources and actually make the machine be an absolutely reliable narrator where it believes a specific thing and can convince an audience that the specific thing is true, even though whoever is feeding it bad data has absolutely skewed everything.
That would be malicious, but it's definitely possible. I would say it's possible. I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that, but it is possible.
But when you're looking at fiction and what you can do with that set idea, you know, the machine has no judgment about it. It's casting a net over the information it's been given and putting out the information that it believes to be true. So if somebody corrupted the data, you could really skew things kind of in an interesting way.
Indeed, and think of the unfortunate situation when somebody would do that to your automobile, to your car.
Well, that'd be bad.
And the GPS or your phone, and the GPS suddenly, instead of giving you good directions, take a left, take a route, or take a U-turn now, it will take you, I don't know, up north to Canada or something. And that can happen. That can happen. It can happen if the software is corrupt, but also, as we just discussed, if the training process was intentionally or by accident tainted.
Well, and also I would think on a much more subtle level, you've got to look at it culturally. Different cultures are going to have different beliefs of what is acceptable data to put in this to give the results that they want. And so I would think that, yeah, hold on just a second, sorry. I would think that that's a big factor that's going forward, is where you decide culturally how you're going to get agreement on what is correct, the correct data to put in.
Yeah, I agree. I would add that this is a two-way highway. Our culture influences, or cultural patterns influence the quality of the training and the quality of the predictions of this of artificial intelligence software, but it also works the other way around. We are already impacted by smart, intelligent software that we are interacting with daily in our smartphone, on the TV, when we go on the internet. The software makes an impact and is changing potentially our cultural components, our knowledge, our customs, the way we interact, even the way we speak, the way we talk, the way we our values, our axiological system changes as a result of the actions taken through this intelligent software. How many times have you Googled for something, let's say a new microwave machine, and decided to buy it, and then you will get in your email or on your phone ads about microwave machines? That makes a difference. It's something, there is software that searches and evaluates and analyzes our behavior, and then returns actions that may influence our behavior in the future. It's a symbiosis.
All right. Well, this is fascinating, and we could talk to you all night, but then that would be very rude to our other guests. So
okay. So may I leave and have my robot continue the discussion? I could have my robot. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back to Dr. Stan at the end of the session when we have a Q&A with all of our guests. So thank you, Dr. Stan.
Thank you.
And I think Joelle's question was a great segue into our next topic, which is cybersecurity. So we've got all of these people and machines that might be malicious or might have been poorly trained. And what are we doing about that? Certainly, it's something that's been at the forefront of people's minds, especially in this turbulent election season. So let's bring Jennifer Fowler, if you could come on in. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me okay? I'm using my AirPods.
We can.
Yep. Okay, great. So I'm not going to share my slides just in case it is a bandwidth issue. But my name is Jennifer Fowler. I'm a cybersecurity analyst at Argonne National Laboratory. I've been there since 2011, but I moved into the cyber arena in 2016, and it has been fascinating. My kind of concept of cybersecurity before I went into the field was very much of like, oh, we got things handled, everything's fine. And now after being in the field, it's like everyone's trying their best, everything's on fire, we're doing the best we can. So, and that's because the internet wasn't built with security in mind, right? It was built as this open and sharing platform where, you know, one university can talk to another and we share this data. And then it kind of turned into a tool, right? Now we use the internet for communication, e-commerce, banking, all of these types of things. And one of my projects at Argonne is looking at internet infrastructure. And when we think of the internet, we don't really think of like the physical aspect of the internet, right? We always think about like, oh, it's this intangible thing that we rely on to send funny memes, or we rely on to, you know, pay our bills or look at Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or whatever. But actually, the physical components of the internet is incredibly important. And if one of those things were to go down, like fiber lines or data centers, what happens, right? So as Joelle mentioned earlier, like, what happens if data just disappears, right? If something happens to a data center and there's no backup, what happens to the information that was stored there? You know, it disappears, obviously, and then you don't have historical backups or anything like that. That's a huge problem. So I kind of look at like, are there choke points within the United States, even internationally, where, you know, maybe there's only one fiber line, or there's a couple where they all converge in the same place? Like, what were to happen if we were to have a major internet outage, or a major data center were to go down, or a region were to be impacted by some type of natural or man-made disaster? How would that impact our, you know, way of life with e-commerce and, you know, data? Or how would that impact our life with being able to talk with our families in 2020? Like, I think the internet has solidified itself more than ever in 2020 as being a critical asset, right? Like, it's kept us sane. It's kept us like streaming videos and laughing, and allowed us to work remotely, pay our bills. All of those things are essential. So looking at internet infrastructure and looking at those physical points of presence across the United States and like what we can do to secure them better is kind of some of the things that I look at. I also look at like people in our group, I don't really specifically look at this, but I think it'd be a really interesting point for the authors, would be vehicle cybersecurity. So my coworker Roland works on vehicle cybersecurity, and, you know, we used to think of vehicles as purely mechanical, right? Like, oh, we have the engine, I don't really know too much about a car, but you know, we have multiple parts of the car. We have like the cooling system, we have brakes, all that stuff, right? But in 1977, we introduced the first ECU, which is an electronic control unit. And these devices are responsible for everything from applying brakes, applying pressure to the brakes, to applying to the gas pedal, right? So like every physical action that we put on a car actually has like an electronic reaction, and that is for the electronic control units in the car. So those are things, right? As we input technology into physical mechanical things, we now have a reliance on electronics. So can those be manipulated? Can we spoof things to make a car seem like it's going faster than it is? Can we remotely speed up a car? Can we slam on the brakes when they're going 80 on the highway? These are the types of things that if we can do that, then certainly bad guys can do that. So what can we do to secure that? And those are the types of things that we're looking at Argonne as well. And then the last kind of thing I want to mention, which I think has never been more prevalent in 2020, is cyber biosecurity. So what is that? This is kind of a contested term. Some people think it should be cybersecurity for bio, or something people think it should be biosecurity and with a cyber component. But basically what cyber biosecurity means is just like the ecosystem of vulnerabilities in the intersection of life sciences. So life sciences are hugely collaborative, right? We talk with people across the world to solve big problems. And that's usually a good thing, except when it comes to like intellectual property. So what if an insider steals that intellectual property? I now have the code base for the vaccine. I steal it and I publish it first, and I get like millions of dollars for a vaccine. So establishing protocols, applying security, applying these types of principles, and making things more secure in the life sciences is kind of what cyber biosecurity is. So like, how do we protect the supply chain process? How do we protect the instruments and like the protocols and all of these things that we use in the life sciences that are so essential right now with the COVID vaccine and everything like that? How do we secure that kind of infrastructures, systems, instruments, those types of things, and still make it possible for innovation to happen, because we need brilliant minds across the world to solve these problems. So how do we do it securely? So those are just kind of some of the research avenues that we look at Argonne. That's certainly not all we do, but some little snippets and nuggets of information for you.
Those are some good nuggets. You like your expert to come in and tell us that the world is on fire, right? All right, Joelle and Aaron, what questions do you have for Jennifer?
Oh, I feel like we need to be out of the age of COVID so I can take Jennifer for like, you know, drinks and coffee and just like kidnap her for a very long time. And
I would love that. I would love that. I've been in my house for 10 months. We've been working remotely. So like literally anything, I'm game.
She could be chained in a basement. She would be totally good with that, apparently.
I'm also super into true crime podcasts. So like, I'm like, all right.
Two of us are meant to be friends.
Exactly.
Because I have to admit, you know, especially when you're going into the bio component with cybersecurity, I have so many questions that involve those two things, and especially with all of the genetic tests that are out there and all of the data that we seem to be feeding people without thinking about it, that is about our own genetic coding, that is about all of that and the security behind all of it. I remember last Christmas seeing something where the DoD put out where they thought that no soldiers or anything should get any of the deals on some of those genetic tests. And I found that fascinating because they said it wasn't necessarily secure and what could possibly be done with it. Like what kind of cybersecurity things are involved in that? Like, and what kind of people would be after that kind of data? Because I always, of course, have ideas, but like, who really is going after it?
So that's hugely interesting, right? And anything that I'm saying, you can find like open source. This isn't a huge secret, anything like that. But I think what's important to realize is that like any product that's like a really great deal or free or anything like that, like an Alexa or something, like a super deal, if you get that as a gift, punt it right out of your house, right? So there are always things that are listening, wanting your data, wanting your genetic makeup. And those are things that necessarily, like you shouldn't necessarily be giving out. So like for instance, let's say I do 23andMe, which I've not done. And I'll tell you why. So 23andMe is great. And all of those like genetic makeup companies, the only thing I would really ever do is probably like I'm a proud dog aunt, and her name is Leia, and maybe like see if she's really a multi-poo, right? Because that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But if I send in my DNA, that's something that I can't ever get back. My thumbprint, any type of biometrics, I can't ever get back. So I am trusting the facility that I'm giving this very sensitive, unique thing about me, that they're gonna like secure it 100%. I think 23andMe is great because they, have worked with CODIS to help like try and crack cold cases. Again, true crime fan. So I think that stuff is great. But in the end of the day, we may have genetic predispositions for things. We may be vulnerable to certain things. Maybe I'm allergic to peanuts, and you gain access to this genetic code base and you're able to figure out that I'm allergic to peanuts. You can now target me specifically, causing me to go into anaphylactic shock because you know that I'm allergic to peanuts because that data wasn't secured. It's not only about like, allergies or anything like that. Maybe I have a predisposition to have cancer of some kind. Do you want this information going into the hands of health insurance companies that can then deny you coverage later in life because it was like a pre-existing condition, even though you didn't know that? What are people doing with your data beyond what you give them? That's kind of like, I'm not like I'm kind of a tinfoil hat person. This isn't tinfoil, it's just a headband, but like legitimately, I worry a lot about where data is, what people are doing with it, and how it's being secured. So that ranges anything from passwords to genetic DNA. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah. And hopefully freaks out everybody else significantly watching this going, okay, maybe, I shouldn't be doing those genetic tests. Someone gave me one for Christmas last year and I think I annoyed them because I still have not done it. Because I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah,
And now I feel really good about that decision.
I was wondering, I mean, when you're talking about this, we're talking about big corporations and countries, people are worrying about China and Russia. But as a writer, what you're often seeing is, the individual hacker. That's the trope in so many things. I was just watching The Flight Attendant, which is a very entertaining show on HBO. And of course, they've got a character that could just hack into anything in about 15 minutes. And, when I was writing Meme, I was thinking about that and made some jokes about that. How realistic is it for an individual in this day and age that is not just working on this 24/7 to be gaining access to major databases, major corporations, to national grids, things like that?
That's a great question. So I like to talk about things in like an inverted pyramid, right? So that's a terrible pyramid, but you get the idea, right? So you have a lot of people that are like script kiddies. These are the people that point and click and like, I'm a hacker, that's awesome. There are a lot of like great tools out there that can help you kind of be a point and click type of hacker. Like, okay, I'm gonna load this program. It's a GUI, which is a graphical user interface. That means that I don't have to access the terminal, the command line, what have you. I don't have to type in code. And that is like the script kiddie. That in the inverted pyramid, man, that's terrible, is like you have the most script kiddies because it's the easiest level. You then have like the kind of middleweight hacker where like they kind of know their stuff. They can do some like light scripting. They can understand how things work, maybe like pwn some like really badly secured databases. Maybe they like find a bug or two in a bug bounty, but they're not like writing their own 0 days or anything like that. And a 0 day is just like a vulnerability in a system and nobody knows that it's there yet until you like execute it and take advantage of it. Then it's known to the general population. And then in the bottom of this terrible pyramid here, like right here, that's where you have like the elite hackers. Those are the people that are like, they know about 0 day vulnerabilities. They're writing their own custom malware. Those are the people that you probably should worry about. Those are the people that aren't likely to come after you unless you have a lot of secrets, or if you're someone very high up or you have some like IP that they want. I would say in general, those types of people, those elite hackers that can do anything in 15 minutes, they are definitely out there. But in general, like that takes years of practice, patience, knowledge, all of that. So those are definitely like the more, they're more rare than like the script kiddie, but they're definitely out there, and they're all over the world. And so what we do at Argonne is we just try and secure things the best they can, suggest measures for remediation of bad like security. But in the end of the day, we don't really know what we don't know, right? So like we think things are secure, but is there a 0 day out there that we don't really know about that they can access all of these things that they shouldn't have access to? Probably, because like I said in the beginning, the internet wasn't built with security in mind. So we do the best we can, but in the end of the day, we don't really know what's out there that we're not securing.
I feel safer.
Yeah. All right. With that terrifying idea in mind, we will say goodbye to Jennifer for now, and we will see her at the end for a Q&A. And we are next going to bring up Aaron Oakes from Argonne National Lab. So if you were worried about cybersecurity, let's see what Aaron does and what he's doing with different types of data and computing. Welcome, Aaron.
Hello, thank you for that, Jennifer. I didn't want to sleep tonight anyway, it's fine. So hopefully my topic is not as stress-inducing or terrorizing. I'm going to talk some about nuclear energy. And as it relates to, oh, thank you. Good shirt. As it relates to computational modeling. So I'm going to try to share my screen. I know it was an issue with Marius. If it remains an issue, just, message me in the chat that like it's messing up. They're just visual aids, so it's not super important, but they're nice, pretty pictures. So let's see if I can do it. Share screen. This thing. Okay, showing up. I'm very blown out. All right. So I know not everyone's super familiar with how a nuclear reactor works. So I have this very basic, nice little GIF that the NRC produces. And this is your basic nuclear power plant. And then we're going to talk about why we care. So at its core, all we really do in a nuclear plant is generate steam. That's our goal, is to generate steam. We drive steam through a steam turbine that spins a generator, and that gets us electricity. It's a very basic concept. It's how most fossil fuel plants work too, except instead of a nuclear reaction, you have a pile of coal or oil or gas, whatever you're burning, you just set it on fire, and that creates energy, creates heat, that boils into steam. And the only difference in a nuclear plant is you use a nuclear chain reaction. And you have steam, it spins a turbine, it condenses back to water, and it just goes through this cycle. And this is the general system that you can expect from anything that's operating right now. Anywhere in the US, it's going to look basically like this. And so modeling and simulation of this started back in like the 50s or so at about this level of fidelity. Not super detailed. You can imagine what computers were like back at the time. You had to save every megabyte. There weren't even megabytes. You had to save every kilobyte. And so you were doing the best you could with the resources you had, but as you are aware, writing sci-fi stuff with computers, computer technology has exponentially grown since then. And so as we add more and more computing power, we can now simulate more and more details of our reactors. So this is your basic structure of a typical reactor core. You can see in a lot of these, there's a little dude here for scale. So these are rather large structures. This would be like this thing here, this reactor vessel, that's right here. And you can see a lot clearer now. It's made up of a bunch of fuel assemblies, which again is about twice as tall as your average dude. Each assembly is made up of fuel rods. Each rod is made up of fuel pellets. They're about the size of the tip of your pinky. Very small things, but they grow into this giant structure that's like massive. And so when you go to simulate these things, you need to know as much details as possible if you want to get an accurate result. And this becomes harder and harder as you add more and more physics with limited computational resources. So in the beginning, you did the best you could, but you had to use very simplified models. You'd see like how does this porosity change over some temperature, and you get a very simple curve. And now you can do much more mechanistic modeling thanks to the advances of computers. And so I have some examples here. These are just, everything here is from the internet. You could Google all these pictures. No, there's no secure secret data that I'm revealing accidentally. So I have some sources on here if you want to Google them later, but they're just all example pictures. And so now we can actually get really high detail models. And this is at the level of this fuel rod here. You can see the little pellets in here. You can sort of see, I don't know, you can't actually see my pointer. Laser pointer right here. You can sort of see the gaps right here between the pellets. It's a lot harder to resolve that with older technology, but now that we have our advanced computers, we can get meshes that can actually see these pellet gaps. You can see, if you look at the surrounding cladding, you can see defects in the temperature and in the stresses. You can actually resolve those now. And this is where you're likely to get weird stuff happening that limits the life of your fuel. So this is where you're going to start seeing cracks maybe forming that will mean you have to take the fuel out and replace it with something newer. So now that we can actually resolve that, we know better how the fuel is going to perform over time. And also now that we have giant supercomputers, we can start doing like full core simulations, where we can take this whole core. You can imagine how many of these individual fuel rods are in this giant core. You can sort of see they resolve them down to like this little level. That's each one of these is now being simulated. So you get all these details in one simulation, thanks to our advances in supercomputers and programming techniques. And you can also even go even higher than that to like the whole reactor system. Back here with our nice pretty GIF. This is the part you actually care about, is transporting this coolant and making electricity. Now you can actually do fluid flow simulations that take into account all this core information and the heat transfer throughout the whole system. And clicked the wrong thing. So our models for these things have gotten better and better over time. Our computational resources have gotten better and better over time. And so now we can do these really advanced simulations and we get really good results with our current technology. But our main driving force for developing these is generating next-gen technology. So this is sort of a hierarchy. We won't go over all this, but this is about where we are now. If you look at plants, out and about in the US, they're around here, Gen 2, Gen 3. What we're researching now is the next gen, Gen 4, all these new advanced novel types, novel designs. There's 6 main designs. Again, we're not going to go into details of all this, but you can see just by looking at these pictures, they're all very different from the first one I showed, all sorts of different structures, different materials, different information going through them. And now that we have all these advanced tools, we can actually simulate these things and people can start developing. You can see these are all very prototypical reactors of what something might look like, but people can now actually begin to start doing calculations of what a real one might be, what temperatures it might operate at, what power you might get out of it. And so again, you can see for scale here, these little dudes, maybe pointer. These little dudes, even smaller now. These are very large scale systems, each one of these, but this also lets us create much smaller scale reactors. And so these are very popular research area right now, especially in nuclear startups, is microreactors, which are much, much smaller, about maybe 1/100th, 1/1000th of the output, but they can be fully factory built and installed on site. You can see this is like a big rig truck. So that's the whole reactor right there. It fits inside a big rig. You can build it in a factory and ship it off somewhere, maybe some city in Alaska that doesn't have good grid connection. You can just hook up one of these little things and power up the small city, or some area in a developing nation that doesn't have a whole lot of power need right now, but it's developing. You get them access to a powered hospital, some water treatment plants, something where you don't need these giant gigawatt reactors, just enough to get your system going. Also, interesting research area right now is space reactors. This is actually a NASA project, the Kilopower project. These would be deployed for space missions, long-term space missions, or potentially if we start doing manned missions to certain areas, Moon or the Mars missions, you could deploy these. These are they're not super high power, but they're made to run completely on their own. You basically like land and you turn it on and it's there. And it's 10 kilowatts of energy for 10 years. No maintenance, no anything. It just sits there and generates power for a while. It's not a huge amount of power, enough to get your little settlement going, but it's enough to get started. And it's if it works out, would be a really cool technology in the future. And that's again facilitated by these advanced software models and systems that we've been developing over the last many years that we can actually, I mean, this one's actually done by NASA, so not really a small company, but a lot of these microreactor ones are being developed by nuclear startups that are, 20 people. They're like, I have an idea for a reactor and I'm going to simulate it. And we have the tools and the technology now that actually lets them do that and come try and implement their designs. So that was long-winded and probably over my time a bit, but I'm going to stop rambling now and stop sharing my screen, or I'll just leave it sharing. No, I won't share. I won't leave it sharing. So you guys can see each other.
All right. I'm feeling a little better. Space reactors.
Space reactors. Hopefully no one hacks them. Jennifer will save us if that becomes an issue.
I'm going to bring us down again.
Okay.
Just because
as writers, we always make it worse. So,
Well, you have to introduce conflict or there's not a book. So that's...
Well, and that's what I was going to say is this, people, if they saw these micro reactors, would be so excited because energy obviously is a huge issue, and renewable energy can't produce on this scale right now of what you're talking about, but nuclear energy, the biggest problem is the PR, right? And I would think that something like
you guys to come up with a new nuclear disaster novel.
Well, right. Well, I mean, you had the Chernobyl miniseries this year that I think that the young generation probably didn't think about it too much. Then something like that sort of brings it back up again, and sort of I wouldn't doubt sets it back a ways. So, I mean, there aren't a lot of stories that are about like nuclear energy is great and that's our future. They're either about we're losing fossil fuels and we're in a Mad Max sort of future, or we have a nuclear meltdown because of human error. So how I mean, it's not your department to do the PR, but how are you approaching that issue? I mean,
We usually, again, it's not my department, but we always try to talk about the positives, right? It's not always great. Just be like, oh, remember that thing that happened 40 years ago? Yeah, that still happened, but it's still okay. You know, you don't have to bring up the negatives. Focus on the positives. Things like the no greenhouse gases being released is a major one. Reliable. So wind and solar are great, except when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, and then you have a little reliability problem. The nuclear reactors run 24/7, super reliably. They're very safe, despite the specific incidences. Our safety record is the best in any power industry, even including all that stuff. Still much safer to do nuclear power than any other form of power. Similar to how you think about like airplanes versus cars. People are terrified of dying in a plane crash, but you're like a billion times more likely to die in a car crash. People get on the highway every day and don't even think about it. And they go to the airport, they're like, oh, please. And that's not the statistics of it. That's just not the way it works out. So we talk about our safety record, talk about our benefits.
I guess my question is, you know, I'm always thinking about the worst. And part of me, when I think about nuclear, because I mean, all the nuclear reactors are so fascinating and like how you implement them, but what kind of pushback often occurs from other industries who might not want to lose kind of that fossil fuel market versus, you know, no greenhouse gases? Because I know there's always a war between them. And, you know, that's always kind of an interesting place because stories were always looking for the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But is there the conflict that we would imagine between industries and kind of even who's lobbying for where the government dollars go or where development happens? Like, what kind of conflict really exists out there?
Well, there's certainly conflict. I don't know if it's at the level of like wars breaking out on the highway between Mad Max style between the energy lobbyist and the nuclear lobbyist or whatever, but certainly
That's cool.
There's and you know, it's not even like malicious most of the time. Like there are certain states that have built their whole economy on coal mining, and it's like, well, we don't like coal, so we're going to get rid of it. And it's like, well, what are they supposed to like? It's not just being like, oh, you don't understand, it's nuclear is way better. Like that's their whole economy. They have to have a plan to transition off that, and that's a challenging topic. And so even when you go to a state like that and be like, nuclear is better for all these reasons, like, but I like our state having money. So, you know, we got to come up with a solution to that. And, you know, obviously I'm not the one doing that. There's people whose energy policy is their whole life, but it's not just about like, oh, we like dirty fossil fuels. It's like real motivations behind a lot of the pushback we get. But there's some positive futures with nuclear energy. Most of the Star Trek realities are based around some form of fusion reactor that is perfect and enables warp drive and all this nice stuff. So, you know, it can just be silently in the background, the big throbbing reactor that makes all of the fantasy possible. So there's some futures with nice nuclear power.
Well,
just usually in the background.
To that end, that's sort of in, you know, your comic book, you know, there's always some, you know, something like Iron Man,
there you go.
he has, you know, that's essentially nuclear energy, I would assume. But I guess I would go back to Joelle's question, where on an international level, how much competition is there these days? And you could tie it into what Jennifer's talking about, how like security of nuclear secrets that isn't weaponry, that's about, you know, controlling power in the future. Who is going to be the power leader in the future? Like how much cooperation is there and how much secrecy is there?
That's a complicated topic to be sure. And a lot of it is above me. So I, you know, do I know which foreign countries are against this? Honestly, no, I have no idea. They don't tell me those things. But from my experience, at least the countries that want it, there's a lot of cooperation. As long as they're not, you know, terrorist supporting countries, we don't talk about them. But the regular countries that like, we want nuclear power, we want this stuff, we'll cooperate with you, will contribute knowledge or researchers to help bring nuclear power here. Sometimes they set up agreements. If something like the microreactors that are fully created, you could set up a deal where like, I will give you the microreactor, you won't open it, it will give you power, and when it's done, you ship it back to me. And that's our, you know, control process of like, don't touch it, just let it sit there and produce power and then give it back to me. don't interact with the fuel at all. Don't interact with any of the waste. I will take care of all that because I have all the experience and knowledge as, the United States or whatever other country, and you're still, getting your feet wet in that. So just we'll lease it to you basically, and then give it back when we're done. And so that can help, like, some security of, like, we don't have to have them figuring out and possibly, doing bad things, possibly having things break because they didn't understand the technology well enough. There's a lot of different strategies that could go into that.
Can I ask one more question? I mean, as an author, we're always trying to figure out how to stay relevant in this ever-changing scientific world, and how to make sure our work is not like, okay, when we write a book, it might get published 2 years from now, in which a lot of things change in the science universe. You showed all of those great graphics of all the different kind of there's
No, just a lot of examples.
there were some really cool examples, but how far are we from implementation for some of those? Because, like, we can research it and see, oh, these things are kind of in the works, but really, how long does it take to get something up and running? How irrelevant will we be? How should we be looking into the future if we're writing a near future?
I would say maybe 10 years if things went well. If you came up with one of those advanced Gen 4 designs and you got your design together and you went to the regulator and they're like, yep, that looks good, go ahead and go for it. Probably like 8-10 years before you could turn it on. Those big ones, again, that's one of the benefits of microreactors. You can build them in a factory. Those big giant systems take a long time and a lot of money to build. So it's a good number of years and a lot of upfront capital. So there's a lot of risk in that. But I mean, the technology is always going to lag with those big ones. Once you make a new design, again, that one's going to be 10 years away. So you get 10 years of use out of this first design before you can even turn the next one on. So there's a little lag. A lot of what we're running was built in like the 70s. So I would love a new plant right now, even if it's obsolete in 10 years, it's still newer than 50 years ago. So
I think that's one of the interesting things about being a writer and being a scientist that's very similar. When you're a writer, especially when you're an aspiring writer, you're doing all this work and you have all these ideas and you might work on them for years, not knowing if anything is going to come of that. And I feel like that's very similar to what happens in research, right? You're doing research that, might not lead anywhere for anybody.
We always hope, right?
Yeah, or it could change the world.
We do the best we can and leave it up to our sponsors to keep funding.
So would you ever co-author a paper with a supercomputer?
Sure, as long as Marius made it. Marius has dipped in toes in nuclear development as well, so I know if he made it, it would know some things about nuclear.
It would be well taught, right?
It would.
Not an evil supercomputer. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. We will get back to you in the Q&A section in
Excellent.
a little while.
Thank you for having me. I will mute myself.
All right. And speaking of teachers, we have an educator with us tonight as well. So Spencer Wagner teaches computer science and mathematics. And before we invite him in, I'm also going to share a video of his that he pre-recorded for Science Riot.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll fill some silence. You brought up something that scientists, they might work on something for a while and nothing comes of it, and it's the same as writers. But I also want to encourage all the writers and scientists out there that something always comes of it. Any sort of work that you put in, whether it doesn't end up in a published form, is going to inform whatever comes next after that you work on. And maybe you'll dip back into bits of it or reuse things. But I tend to think that, that's a big part of the process and one of the most important parts of the process.
I agree, because nobody should ever read my first novel. But boy, I learned a whole lot from it. Trust me, nobody should read it. I've deleted it from everything. So maybe Jennifer could hack it and find it somewhere. But really, I think it's deleted from everything. Because my husband's the type that would put it up on Amazon to see if anyone's dumb enough to buy it. I needed more practice than anybody. And I think that the COVID vaccine they're talking about even came out of research that's been in the works for, almost 20 years. It's the reason why things are able to be moved along faster. And it's the reason I think that scientists are like the coolest things ever, and the reason why authors and scientists get along so well. We all tend to work in a vacuum for a while.
And have to be patient, very patient.
I need to work on that still.
All right. Thank you, my friends.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I'm a computer scientist. Let's talk computers. First we created them, now they're taking our jobs. Our sanity, most importantly, our ability to do good math. I'll come back to that last one. But first, how did we get into this war? How do we win it? Well, unfortunately, the only winning move might be not to play. In 1833, Charles Babbage, mathematician, invents the first modern computing machine. The Babbage machine, he calls it. But he never builds it. He takes it with him to his grave, along with his other game-changing idea for turkey-flavored candy corn. His co-worker, Ada Lovelace, she comes up with the first computer algorithm. It's sleek, it's efficient, never makes it off the paper. She never uses it. She knows the moment we start adopting algorithmic thinking, we are losing to an endless onslaught of Great British Bake-Offs. What happened? 100 years later, Alan Turing invents the Turing machine in the 1930s. Yes, he was able to use it to stop the Germans from enslaving humanity, but he simultaneously enslaves us all to an endless existence of doom scrolling. So we can't not play. But that doesn't mean we have to try to play by their rules. A computer is really good at calculating. It's kind of their thing. And you walk into any math class in this country, what do you see? Boy, you've got 2 minutes to finish the last 30 questions, or you won't be getting into college. May I use a calculator? No, that would be cheating. Why are we obsessed with speed-running math? Do we treat any other subject this way? Can you imagine walking into art class with a paintball gun? Boy, 200 paint by numbers, go! The thing is, math, like art, is actually quite beautiful when you slow down, take your time. Humans have this uncanny ability to visualize the abstract. We shouldn't be in a race with computers to pump out math. We should be slowing down to appreciate all the hidden connections. Sure, we may have to drop the paintball guns in exchange for some paintbrushes, but let's not lose the beauty of mathematics to the horrors of an algorithm. That's how we got Facebook.
All right. So welcome, Spencer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we ask you some questions, do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you created that talk?
Sure, that was part of the Science Riot here in Colorado. It's run through our Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and they just they bring in scientists from around the state, and they train them in the art of modern comedy, and then they have them present for about 3 minutes their piece, and it generally is trying to be both educational and humorous at the same time, and it's thankfully, I think, opens the world of comedy to the broader realms of science and gets people who perhaps live their existence inside a lab out amongst the people and sharing everything that they're doing in hopefully a relatable and funny way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very fun organization, and they have great streaming shows. So hopefully we'll have more collaboration with them on Future Telling in the future. So Aaron and Joelle, what did you think about Spencer's talk? What did that get you thinking about?
You know, I am always fascinated at the idea that because he's talking about various choices that people make and that, hey, if they didn't do this, then we wouldn't have had that. There's that cause and effect idea that, I always love math because, when you have one thing on one side of an equation, it always equals the other thing typically, or it can equal on the other side. I'm doing a lot of algebra with my 12-year-old right now. So it's like balancing equations. And I always like that idea, but like, what happens when you choose to take something away or you don't do it? Like, that's to me always kind of a fun revisionist history. Like, what piece of math will we pull out of history, or somebody didn't invent something or allow an algorithm to take place? Maybe we wouldn't have a certain thing, and how it would change the entire shape of our history as we know it. I'm curious what Spencer thinks would be the one thing that if we removed it, what it, like, mathematically, if somebody didn't publish something, what would have changed? Like, what would be the one thing you would pull out of history to that would alter everything? People always don't think of math changing the world, but really it can.
And I do believe it has. In fact, teaching math history is one of the most fascinating ways to get people interested in why we study it, I think. For me, it would go all the way back to the Pythagorean triangle. It was uniquely discovered in multiple different countries, multiple different time periods. And we talk about Pythagoras being the fundamentals of geometry. But really, the idea of logical proof began there with this understanding of how we could know with certainty an outcome based on a few simple inputs. And so I think if you took that out, you never really would have had the progression towards the maths that we see today. I mean, I know math was very useful with calculations and business in the early times, but that separate society of Pythagoras in Greece, really, their fundamentals of proof, I think, is what started them down this logical thinking and training path that eventually culminated in the Turing machine, as we started out our evening talking about.
Yeah, I'm also interested. You were breaking down the history, and I'm interested in learning not the history of math, but knowing where the building blocks are for where we are right now in terms of computers. I mean, I pick up my iPhone and I don't know what's going on behind it, because I've not been given that education. That education is reserved for a higher level. On a more basic level, I look at kids are taught how to write stories, they're taught how to read and write, but we're not taught the sort of building blocks outside of arithmetic. I mean, in high school, you get up perhaps to calculus, but where would you like to see early education focus more on in terms of in terms of stories? I find it very interesting. If we lost all our technology, how do we build it back up again? There's only a certain select class that could be able to do that. So with more early education, where do you think we should focus on in that realm?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a question that really should be addressed right now in our modern world. We talk about Moore's law and how it increases the rate of technology improvement, but our rate of education, as you mentioned, is pretty linear. We go from arithmetic to algebra with your 12-year-old and then to calculus with your 16-year-old, and suddenly you're thinking, okay, what have I learned to do? I haven't learned how to create a new artificial intelligence, or train using metadata, or analyze the data science that exists in the world now. And honestly, that is what's missing in our classrooms these days, is an emphasis on what I would argue as useful math, but also to help us further appreciate math, rather than just to try to understand the how, to understand perhaps the why we teach what we teach, where it came from, why proofs were useful back in the day, because they lead us to a certainty of having faith in our technology these days, when people have proved that a certain tech is reliable. So I would love to see data science brought into the classrooms. I think that is probably, in my opinion, a third of what the modern world is being prepared to work around. And our high schoolers have very little understanding of how to work with that, because we don't have time to teach it to them in the classroom, because we're teaching them how to solve an equation that can be done by a computer in a millisecond. And you wonder to yourself, okay, great. If we lost all our technology, well, we'd be able to start over in about the 1200s, maybe the 1600s, with all of the math that we've taught our high schoolers. But we never actually get up to the modern century. So it's a question of why are we teaching what we're teaching? And maybe if we want to prepare ourselves for the futures of tomorrow, we should start preparing our students who are going to be living in those futures.
Yeah, it made me think of the end of Fahrenheit 451, where you know, people memorize these books to hold on to our language, and that was sort of presented as the most important thing, that our stories. But there's this whole other realm that was not necessarily deemed important, and in terms of a functioning society the way we want it, is a really sort of fascinating, you know, question for a writer to ask, because, you know, we're writing a lot about post-apocalyptic worlds, and to realistically approach how you build from the bottom up, you need to know these issues.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think if we were trapped on a desert island, how much time would we spend teaching our children algebra versus perhaps teaching them how to create some sort of internet capabilities to reach out to the world and ask for rescue? And as we send, hopefully, future students to Mars or wherever else we go, I'm wondering how much of our time should be dedicated to what we currently spend in the classroom, and maybe we should start to revitalize it for the modern AI era.
It comes back to space reactors, I think. My new sci-fi novel.
Exactly.
Called it. Joelle, did you have anything else to add? No, other people can have space reactor. It's okay. It's all right. So now let's bring everybody back in, and we're going to open up the Q&A. So if you have questions for any of the experts, and yes, we have another poll. So you can move this poll around on your screen. What aspect of computer science will have the greatest impact on our future? So hearing what you've heard so far, what do you think that might be? And as you're answering our poll, we'll also take some questions for our experts. Happy to riff more on story ideas and our paranoia on everything we've heard so far tonight, and our hopefulness of space reactors. Children on Mars learning practical math while being powered in their settlement by space reactors.
So glad that's the takeaway from all of the amazing things Marius and Jennifer were talking about. Space reactors is what you're taking away.
Space reactor. I mean, there's so many good things. But the space reactor, you know, in the book, it would have a helpful AI that writes a children's book for the children of the settlement. It'll all come in there. It'll all come in.
And it'll be protected.
Yeah.
From cybersecurity threats.
Jennifer will make sure it's totally protected and can't be hacked.
I would just like to clarify too, I realize I came off as kind of like a nut job. I think that like we are doing an incredible job in helping secure things. I realize that like you probably after my talk expected this to be all tinfoil, but like in general, I do think that like most people are good. I do think that like we're doing the best we can at securing things. I just have like a healthy dose of skepticism, which may have shown a little too much during my talk, but like, you know, I wish everyone were a little bit skeptical, but it's also good to be an optimist. So.
Yeah. And it looks like a lot of people have answered our poll. So artificial intelligence, people think might play the most significant role going forward. Let me see. And
I would like to say, Jennifer, I think Aaron and I helped contribute to you feeling like you might have been wearing a tinfoil hat. I mean, we did set you up for the most conspiracy theory moments out there, just.
It's all good. It's definitely things I think about, so no worries.
Well, I've already devised a story where an artificial intelligence breaks into a nuclear reactor, causes a meltdown, and then then we're left to educate the new generation who survives. So it's all symbiosis here.
But only at a 1200s AD level.
Yeah,
technology.
exactly.
Jennifer, I'm curious if there's something in your background, your education, that led you to ask such good questions, to be so skeptical, because that's actually something that I try to train my students to do, and I think it's missing.
It's a great question. I had a great mentor. His name is Mike Thompson, and he's very much a tinfoil hat man. But I have a background. I got my undergrad in genetics, and so I've kind of always been very like scientifically minded. And then just like arguing with my sister growing up, like we're best friends, but like they would always make me prove my facts. So they're like, where did you read that? I was like, well, it's my AP environmental science book, obviously. And they would make me like crack it open and be like, look, it's right here on page 93. This is the fact that I'm talking about. So I think like growing up with a sister who would always like make me want to prove my facts, as well as having a mentor once I entered the computer science field. You know, and like computer science in general and cybersecurity, you see things like deep fakes, and you see like you Google the website, this person does not exist. It's just basically AI creating like faces of people that don't actually exist, and they look completely real. And so when you see those types of things, and you see what science and computer science and AI and all these like amazing techniques that we have, when you see what they can do and what they can fake, it really makes you take stock of like, hey, maybe I shouldn't take things at face value. Maybe I should look at like, you know, the references at the end of this paper and do some digging on my own. So I think like exposing students to the things that are possible, like deep fakes and this person does not exist, help kind of foster a healthy sense of skepticism.
So building upon the thought, the comment about skepticism that Jennifer brought in, I'm thinking that maybe something to exploit would be a trend that I see in moving away a bit from deterministic models into stochastic approaches, statistical methods. Building on Spencer's talk, we tend to use Bayesian analysis, uncertainty quantification, and to bring this to the daily life. It's much like, instead of us trying to predict that tomorrow the temperature will be 64.928,357 degrees, we make a prediction that tomorrow the temperature will be approximately 60 to 70 degrees, and we all live with that. We live with this element of uncertainty and find it satisfactory in the daily life. I see the same thing in science now, trying to evaluate uncertainty and somehow departing from that desire that was so acute, so strong a decade or two ago, to get the highest precision, the largest number of digits after each answer. It's a change that I see in science. I think is more general in society. We can live with uncertainty. We can cope with it better now.
We had a question and a comment. So one of the comments was about Asimov's laws of robotics. And that gets me thinking about, as our scientists, our researchers, do you read the science fiction that's takes place in your field, and or are you not able to read it because you're just like, oh, they got it wrong? And if so, or if not, are there any types of science fiction or stories that have influenced your work?
So like CSI Miami, or not, sorry, CSI Cyber. Did anyone see that show? It was like, I think it was like one season. It was not great. And it's just because they tried to make like computer science super exciting. There's something called a Faraday bag where it just basically blocks all input and output signal of a device. So you can put your phone in it and, you know, it can't be hacked, and you also can't like delete stuff remotely. They would like put a phone into the bag, like super slow. And it was just like really cringy. They tried to make it cool. They were wearing sunglasses while doing it. That kind of stuff kind of makes me cringe because you're trying to make something like, I don't find that particularly super cool. But then there are other things like, there are definitely books out there that get it right. And there are shows like Mr. Robot where it's like very close to the truth, where kind of like art imitates life type of thing. And even if it's not 100% on point, I still appreciate like the author and like the creatives behind the content, their intent to try and make it as interesting and, you know, include elements of what could be. I still find that very interesting. So I'll read things even if they're kind of like off of what actually is possible, just because I really enjoy the fact that they at least try to include something with that I work with on a daily basis.
I mean, speaking from an author's perspective, my father is a geneticist, and I grew up talking about books with him and movies, and he seemed to get most upset when something was presented in a very realistic way and had problems. He liked stuff that was fast and loose with science as long as it did it in a way that it was sort of obvious that it's taking a lot of liberties, as long as it's confronting these thematics. So something like, you could talk about a time travel story. Now, time travel is, you know, scientifically impossible. Yeah, scientifically possibly impossible. But the more you get into it on a logical level, the more it sort of falls apart. You know, something like Back to the Future is completely ridiculous, and you know, a picture fading while he's of his parents while, you know, they're not going to exist makes no sense whatsoever scientifically, but is fun storytelling, and you're willing to suspend disbelief. It's that balance between using the thematics of science and the reality of science, and what you're comfortable with as a writer and what the audience is comfortable with, scientists and just general audience.
Yeah, I would agree, if I may, with Aaron, that the quality of the story is paramount, is more important than the actual physics or chemistry or whatever, even mathematics that is captured. And I remember reading Asimov, of course, The Foundation, or Frank Herbert, Dunes, and then not enjoying that much some scientific science fiction books that had extraordinarily interesting twists and turns, but it wasn't the type of writing that I enjoyed. And it's the same with the movies. If you go and want to see a movie that is anchored in physics and also a good story, I would recommend Interstellar. At the other end, maybe Gravity and other things that were too heavy, pun intended, for my cinematographic taste.
Well, Marius, I wanted to ask you, because you do write fiction and poetry, and so I always think it's interesting that you don't write science fiction at all. So do you want to talk a little bit just about what you write and why you write it and how it differs from your scientific background?
So I do write short stories, fiction, not necessarily science fiction. So I reserve, I have this luxury of picking a certain area, a certain style, and somehow science fiction, I didn't think I was gifted enough to do that, to merge the science with, maybe because I tend to be too accurate in the scientific description, and that damages the flow of the story. If you really care about all the aspects of chemistry, material science, and astronomy, the story may suffer, and that's why I shade away. But I would say that my short stories tend to use imagination in a way that is similar to what sci-fi authors do. I would hope so. And same in poetry. Of course, poetry is different in many ways. It's so personal, it's so emotional to the author and to the readers, I would say. But maybe this is, I never analyzed myself, and I never had either a shrink or a palm reader tell me why I write stories and poetry. I would say it's just an impulse. I feel the need to do it. And I was curious. So to Aaron and Joelle, when you write something, write a book, is that because you feel it's necessary, you have to do it, or is something more rational, more planned? You have all your books lined up over the next decade and you know exactly, I guess not, but how do you go about your next project? That's the thing.
Well, I can't speak for Aaron, but I know for me, it's always inspired by a story question that comes right out of the world. Like, you know, when I wrote my computer, you know, social media network thriller, it was based on all of my crazy friends on Facebook who seem to always click the links that say they're going to get free stuff. And they actually believe they're going to get free stuff. And then they're surprised they get hacked, and then they apologize, and then they click on the same link the next week. Like, okay, they're doing this and they're real. What would they like? And we know who they are. What would they do if we didn't know who they were and they were getting free stuff? Like, that's kind of where the ideas always come from for me, is watching something in real life and going, huh, what if we really kind of went further with that? How do we push the boundaries? When I wrote Need, it was also around the time that I think my favorite article came out that everyone was sharing on Facebook was the insidious nature of Facebook Messenger. And it was discussing all of the things you give up and all of the quirks and the kind of the, I mean, come on, the word insidious was in the title, all of the bad things about it. And people were swearing they would never do it. And then one by one, the dominoes went down and they were willing to be like, well, everyone else is doing it, I guess I will too. That's kind of, I never know where my next story is going to come from, because it's always from an idea like, oh, look, people seem to be believing these strange memes, no matter how much you fact check online, and how their realities are changing for them. And they can't seem to believe facts, no matter how much you present them to you. How do you get them to believe it? So I'm not sure where the next story will come from, but I'm certain it will come from some sort of really great research paper that one of you is doing, or even from this talk, because, you know, you start to wonder what if, and you just go down the rabbit hole. Aaron's probably way more structured than I am. I just wait for something to hit me that I can't get out of my head.
No, I am very similar. I mean, I'm looking at more just a germ of an idea that comes along, and then I explore it for a little while, whether I'm writing a few pages, thinking about a character, or just sitting with the idea for a while and seeing if it's something that I want to explore for 300 pages. And a lot of times you might start and then say, no, this isn't going to work. Or you just find some access point, a voice of a character, an ending that you want to reach. But it always starts with some sort of germ of an idea. Like my most ridiculous book is called Spontaneous, and it's about a high school full of kids that start to spontaneously combust. And it's a ridiculous idea, but I saw potential in it, and I, you know, sort of wanted to present it as a sort of straightforward young adult novel with this twist that, you know, works on a metaphorical level, but also works on a emotional level. And when I came up with the idea, I thought, this is ridiculous. There's no reason anyone would want to read this, but I enjoyed writing it, and I had questions that I wanted answers to, so I kept writing and I kept going with it. And that's usually how books happen. And there's, you know, 50 times where I've done that and it hasn't gone anywhere. And those are sitting somewhere else. But the ones that you keep going on are the ones that end up hopefully keeping your career going. You know, it's always a chase.
Well, and that book was very fun to read, and now it is a hit movie. So we're pushing up against the end of our time. But if anyone has from the audience has any more questions, do put them in the Q&A box and I'll be monitoring that. But as we're doing that, I'd like to ask all of the panelists to think about, you know, we've covered a lot of topics so far, you know, broadly speaking on computers and cybersecurity and big data, lots of different things. So where would you like to see this go in terms of society and in terms of writing in the next, let's go big, 50 to 100 years? Like what do you think will come from what's happening now in research and in ways that we'll be thinking about that research.
I just like to say on a personal level, I still want my flying cars. Like every science fiction movie since I was a kid has promised me flying cars. And I keep looking for like the science that's going to make that happen. So if anybody knows of any flying car science out there that I have yet to see, please send it my way.
Would you settle for floating cars?
Well, just in terms of what we're all facing right now, I think we're going to see a lot of biological advances, and certainly with the research going into vaccines and DNA and RNA. And I'd be curious of how that ties in with technology and because there's got to be an interaction. And I'm not talking necessarily cyborgs, but I think it's very exciting to think that as terrifying as the world is right now, there's a lot of interesting work that's probably leaping forward by 5-10 years that it wouldn't have before.
I think that the kind of surveillance state where we're in, where, I sound like a conspiracy theorist. Let me back that up. I think that there will be a lot of advances in technology and medicine, and I think it'll be incredible. I do think that we need to kind of take security into our own hands as the end user. So, if something is free, it's because you are the product. So, if I am using this free service, like, gosh, I don't know, Google storage, Google Pictures, if you're using that, they're probably scanning your pictures, mapping your face, and then trying to identify you across the web. So I think that in the future, there will be incredible technological advances in medicine and biotech in any kind of industry. But just to balance that with what are you giving up when you take advantage of that?
Jennifer, just so you know, I was just typing a note to myself. So I now have the quote down that if something is free, it's because you are the product, because I feel like that is totally the epitome of a story idea ready to start.
For sure. If you want further inspiration, my crypto hero, his name is Bruce Schneier. He invented the algorithm called Blowfish, Twofish, a bunch of others, but basically he is a data and security and privacy expert, and he wrote a book called Data and Goliath. And it kind of goes into talking about how much we are being tracked and surveilled. And even if you turn off location services on your phone, you can still be triangulated with their cell towers, and how that data isn't necessarily private. So if you are looking for a good book to become a skeptic, that would be one.
You assume I'm not already a skeptic.
So
I'm also wearing the tinfoil hat over here.
That's what I was wondering. Do either of you have those purses that have the Faraday cage in them so you can't be tracked? I feel like you do, Jennifer. Yep.
I do. They're just credit card sleeves.
Okay.
And then I have one on my passport. But yeah, you can get them for like $10 on Amazon. That's really good. Get a camera cover for your cell phone if you can, and your computer, all those good things.
Everyone can do their Christmas shopping and holiday, or Hanukkah shopping for the people that they love right now.
Excellent. Spencer or Aaron, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say I'm most curious to see someone who can envision properly what the world of tomorrow looks like in terms of training the people who live in it. The most influential sci-fi book that I read growing up was called Rainbow's End, where it describes really a school that is preparing people for the future in which they live, more so than just kids sitting around desks in space, which always just seems to take whatever we have on Earth and put it in space. And I'm thinking that's not what we need. We need something that shows us how to instantly integrate technology into our lives the moment it's invented. You almost think about cybernetics as like those implants that will give you this information kind of matrix style. But even before that, what does the world of tomorrow look like in terms of training us to use this tech we're supposed to be creating, so that we can get a student who's in high school now making those nuclear space reactors by 10 years from now?
Well, perhaps it will be easier with the advances in technology. According to Star Trek, you can do that stuff in high school in the year 2357. So it's coming. I do hope, though, with the advances of the modeling and simulation tools, we can start to deploy these technologies faster. And I'm hoping that that also helps with education, as Spencer was saying, that once we have these resources, it's a little easier to get that information out there. I would, of course, as the nuclear engineer, hope we adopt more nuclear technology in the future and solve the climate crisis and all that stuff. Hopefully that happens 50 years or other things will happen. So I'm going to keep hoping for that. That's my vision. We keep working on our part of that.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I think we have enough great minds in this Zoom meeting for a whole summit, but we only had about less than 2 hours, but I think we crammed a lot of good stuff in. So thank you, everyone. And we will post this on YouTube for you to become products of YouTube and watch the video as it streams there. But have a good night. Have a good rest of the year. Future Telling will resume in 2021, and we will have more topics and more things to share. So thank you so much. Thanks, everyone of my guests.